Hi, I'm Nalini and this is a Dark Magazine podcast. Today I'm putting Sarah Ayoub in the limelight. Sarah is a freelance journalist and an author based in Sydney, Australia. Her work has appeared in various print and online publications including Marie Claire, Madison, Sunday Style, Cosmopolitan, House and Garden, ABC Unleashed, Cleo, Frankie, Yan, Girlfriend and more. And she's spoken at numerous industry events with the Sydney Writers' Festival, Emerging Writers' Festival, Children's and Young Adults Writers' Festivals, the Walkley Foundation and Vibewire. She's also appeared on national television and radio. Sarah's debut novel, Hate is Such a Strong Word, was the #1 most searched book on the HarperCollins website 3 months before its release, and quickly became a favourite supplementary text for students in New South Wales studying the English units of identity, belonging and journeys. Her second novel, The Yearbook Committee, was released earlier this year, and it's been acclaimed as the new Breakfast Club. Sarah has a Master of Media Practice from Sydney University and teaches journalism at the University of Notre Dame. A self-confessed nerd and goody two-shoes, Sarah decided to pursue a career in journalism at the age of 10 after realising that, like Lois Lane and Vicky Vale, it was always the reporter who got the superhero. Welcome, Sarah.
Thank you for having me.
Now, you've had 2 novels published as well as a whole heap of other writing, so I'd like to take this in chronological order, if that's okay.
Sure.
What kind of stories do you write as a journalist?
All different ones. So I've written a bit of opinion stuff. I used to do that a lot when I was younger. Now, not so much. But I've written, serious stuff like about, children watching violence on TV or seeing the glamorization of gang crime in pop culture. Probably because of my Middle Eastern heritage, that was something I was really interested in writing about. I've written about, drugs and risk-taking among teenagers. I've written about, more fun stuff, like I visited Coco Chanel's apartment, which isn't open to the public in Paris, and I wrote about that for House and Garden magazine. It's really hard now going back through everything I've written since I started writing when I was like 21 or 22. I've written about, style or health, social media, like I've written a few things on, social media and Twitter and, how we use it. A whole bunch of different stuff.
So there's been a wide range of topics for really diverse publications.
Yes. And I think that's what I love about being a freelancer. It's the flexibility to write about whatever happens to interest me at the time or whatever I'm intrigued by.
Okay. What's it like working for all these magazines? I mean, it must have been really exciting to go to Paris and visit Coco Chanel's apartment and things like this.
That was incredibly exciting because I actually really love the Chanel brand, not just because, it's a fancy brand or a luxury brand, but I really admire, the way that Coco Chanel turned her life around. She came from a very, very poor family, and of course she did have some financial backing from male suitors, but essentially she did it all on her own with her hard work, and she was really, really dedicated. A lot of people don't know that, she would spend so much time on a jacket, and if one seam was, not quite right, like slightly imperfect, she would tear the whole thing apart and start again. She was very, very passionate about her brand and what it stood for. So that was really interesting. Yeah, I mean, I love writing for a diverse range of audiences and publications, and writing for magazines is something I've always wanted to do. I know that blogs are big now and digital media is so important, and I love digital media because it has allowed so many new voices to flourish. But as well, there's something about, the glossy pages of a magazine, being able to save something that you really, really like or stick it on your wall or whatever. I love that.
I think social media puts power into the hands of people who, well, puts publication into the hands of people who wouldn't otherwise have an opportunity. So we get a huge range of voices.
Exactly. I mean, there's so many positives about social media and new media, and citizen journalism is one of them. For the first time in forever, the people have a voice. Unfortunately, sometimes the wrong people have a voice, and it has given rise to cyberbullying and things like that, which is it's pretty sad, especially when it causes really bad outcomes. But on the whole, the digital revolution has been a great one and a really positive one for our society.
Yeah. On to your first novel. What can you tell us about Hate is Such a Strong Word?
Okay, so this is Hate is Such a Strong Word. It was inspired by my upbringing in southwestern Sydney. I come from a very traditional Lebanese Christian family. I was born in Australia. My parents migrated here from Lebanon, and I went to a monocultural school from kindergarten to year 12, and I really felt like by the time I got to year 10 and year 11 that I was living in a bit of a bubble. And I was coming of age. I mean, I talk about this in schools. I mean, adolescence is hard enough as it is. You're dealing with, questions about your future, interactions with the opposite sex or same sex, or changing friendships and things like that. And then for me, all of this felt a bit harder because in the late 90s and early noughties, Lebanese people were, the scum of Australian crime. And you had everyone from the police commissioner and the New South Wales Premier talking about the community almost as a whole, as though we were all criminals. And when I got to year 10, year 11 and year 12, I started thinking about, would this be a little bit better if we interacted a little bit more? And I was specifically talking not about the whole community, but about the people that I knew and loved. If we spend more time outside our bubble, would people see beyond our stereotypes? And when I went to uni, I felt like I was challenging those stereotypes all the time.
Yeah. So in the book, I think you've probably already answered this question, but in your novel, the school is monocultural, although they're immigrants living in Sydney. So why did you choose to set the novel in a monocultural school that is so different from mainstream Australia?
I like there to be an element of truth in my writing. And I think that even with most writers, even if they're writing dystopian novels or fantasy or sci-fi, the human experience or the experience of the character, the feelings, they always ring true. And I said it in a monocultural school because that was my experience, and it laid authenticity to Sophie's story. Now, Sophie is not me. She's very much her own person, but there is a lot of me in her, and a lot of the things that she feels are things that I felt. And she probably would not have felt that way, and I probably would not have felt that way if I was in a mixed school, in an environment where I got to interact with other people. The reason why I felt like I felt, and the reason why Sophie felt like she felt, is because she was in that monocultural school, and the story would not have rang true if I had decided to change it.
Yeah. Now, I found, and I'm sure you've heard this before, but reading your book, you're talking about Christian Lebanese people and being a people group, not just being a few people scattered here and there who happen to be Christian, but it's an actual people group. Is this a significant people group? Like, are there a lot of you?
Sorry?
Are there a lot of Christian Lebanese?
Oh, there definitely are. There happens to be more of them outside Lebanon than inside Lebanon. There is a significant portion. So There are Orthodox Christians and there are Maronite Christians. Maronites are an Eastern Rite of the Catholic Church, so the Pope Francis would still be their head. And there is a significant number of them in the United States, in France, in Brazil and other parts of South America, and in Australia. So in Sydney, in Melbourne, in Queensland, in Adelaide, there are Maronite churches in all of those capital cities. I think Lebanon probably has the most Christian Lebanese in the Middle East. There are a few, in Syria, in Jordan. Unfortunately, most of the Christians in Iraq have now either been persecuted or have left the country. Lebanon definitely was the place where most Middle Eastern Christians lived, and it's actually enshrined in the Lebanese constitution that the president of Lebanon has to be a Maronite Catholic, because when they made the constitution in 1942, when the country gained its independence from the French, the Lebanese were actually the majority there. The Christians were actually the majority in Lebanon and the Maronites were the majority. And a lot of people don't know that, because it's just an assumption that when you think Middle East, you automatically think Muslim. Now, obviously, the dynamics of the population have changed since the constitution was drawn up in 1942. A lot of Christian Lebanese have immigrated, same as the Muslim Lebanese. It's just a byproduct of our time. But yeah, we are a significant people group, and I really wanted to make sure that Sophie retained that identity, because I felt that everywhere I went, people would make an assumption about me just because I was from the Middle East. And not that I was offended or anything, but I also wanted to give those people a voice.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I was really surprised. I'd never heard of Christian Lebanese other than, the occasional person. So how in Australia, how do perceptions that Lebanese are Muslims impact on the Christian Lebanese?
It's not necessarily a big deal. I mean, if someone, makes an assumption, you just correct them, but it's not insulting or anything like that. It's just a byproduct of, what they see around them, or, misaligned, media representations or things like that. A lot of people don't know that, for example, our first female governor in New South Wales, Marie Bashir, she's a Christian Lebanese woman, and her husband Nick Shahady, who's the Lord Mayor of Sydney and who captained the Wallabies back in the day, he's a Christian Lebanese person as well. But we just, people don't know this. Probably because there were earlier generations, they assimilated a lot more. And I do talk about that in Hate is Such a Strong Word, and I talk about as well, I mean, Sophie's parents are very strict. My parents were very strict. And that also depends on when they came. My parents came at a time when there were a lot of Lebanese living in Sydney, so they didn't have to assimilate as much. And because they were, living among their own people, they could retain so much of, the rules that they live by, or the code that they live by back home. Whereas earlier generations obviously assimilated a lot more because they had to. And it also depends on, where you're from in Lebanon. I mean, the northern people who come from the mountains and the villages over there are more traditional, more conservative than the people who lived in a capital city.
Okay. Now, in Hate is Such a Strong Word, there was one of your characters was complaining because there were programs that were specifically aimed at Lebanese Muslims that were denied to Lebanese Christians. Is that kind of thing actually happening in Sydney?
That actually did happen at the time, in the aftermath of the Cronulla riots. The local federal member for whatever the seat of Bankstown is, I think it's called Watson, I'm not 100% sure. He took 4 boys from the Shire and 4 boys from, Bankstown to do the Kokoda track, and all 4 of those Lebanese boys were Muslim, and that was a bit disheartening for me because the Lebanese community as a whole suffered from all the byproducts of the crime that was happening and the gang rapes, and all of the stuff. There was so many things. There was September 11, like it all happened at once. Over a period of 5 or 6 years, and then Cronulla in 2005. And that was disheartening for me because I had so many Lebanese Christian male friends who weren't able to get jobs or who were denied entry into bars or things like that because they just assumed. I mean, one of them was an altar server at his church. I mean, he was like really straight and such a good guy, but because he looked Lebanese and because his name was Lebanese, every time we went somewhere, people just assumed he was a thug. And I thought, like, if you are going to paint us all as criminals, then when an opportunity comes along, you need to include everyone. And this is no direct attack on the Muslim community at all because, it wasn't them that chose it. But once again, I just felt like the wider community was ignoring, the reality of our cultural dynamics.
Well, they probably were because they're probably as ignorant as I am. What do you hope readers take away from Hate is Such a Strong Word?
It feels weird talking about it because it's been out for so long now. I guess I just want them to see that sometimes there's so much more to people than what they hear about in the media, and that all young people just have that common desire to fit in and to be accepted and to want to be themselves without having to conform to what, your ideal of them is. I've had girls of mixed backgrounds writing to me to tell me how much they related to Sophie, and I think that's really important. So I want them to be able to relate to the character. Some really bad reviews have said, oh, she's a complete whinger, and she is a whinger, but it just means that my characterization was so on point. But
how many teenage girls are whingers, regardless of their ethnic background?
There's so much change happening in your life, and sometimes you don't have the platform to talk about it. So you are going to whinge in your diary, or you are going to whinge to your friend. That is how you get through things. It's quite cathartic. I guess I just want them to be able to relate to the character and to feel that there really shouldn't be any limitations on what they can do, and that they can challenge perceptions of them, and also to see the good in other people, because Sophie really has to find her voice, and I want young people to be able to find their voice, but she also has to see beyond what other people are telling her about the half-skip boy at her school. So it's as much his story as it is hers, he has a big part to play in that story, because I sometimes in hindsight, like, as I get older and become more feminist, or start to see, the female power, or, the patriarchy a little bit more, I think, why did I write a book where the guy or the male has to help the female see her potential? But sometimes that is the reality. If you're living in a bubble your whole life and someone else comes along, whether they are male or female, older or younger, they are going to inspire you to see a little bit more beyond that. And he does challenge her, and I think that's what makes their dynamic so interesting. Ultimately this is a story for young people. I've had a lot of older people that have written to me and have enjoyed it as well, and said, oh my gosh, this was just like me growing up. The relatable bit is the most important bit. I just want them to relate to it.
Yeah. Now, I have to apologise to our international listeners. Skippy is a term that's I brought it up first, and now Sarah's raised it. A Skippy is from the TV series Skippy the Bush Kangaroo that I think it was made in like the 1960s and 70s. Now, immigrants to Australia from non-white backgrounds tend to call white Australians Skippies, just like Australians have tended to call people various different terms that we won't go into. But I quite like Skippy. I certainly don't take offence at Skippy, so yes. Now, some people believe that Hate is Such a Strong Word is one of many books about teenagers from non-English speaking backgrounds. Do you think there are that many out there? I mean, I'm wondering if there's a perception that there are enough books out there with non-English speaking characters, because the white majority are used to seeing this as a default demographic. You were talking about feminism. We have men who complain, or people who complain about too many women, because they're used to seeing the default character is a straight white non-disabled male. So do you think that's having an impact?
I think now there's definitely a bigger push for diverse stories, and diversity can come in all sorts of different, stories. I don't know I think there can never be enough. Australia is thankfully a country where a lot of people from very different backgrounds and very different opinions live together. And I think the more diverse stories we have, the more they accurately reflect our population. And I have this thing where I feel, and I'm sure many others would agree, that books foster a sense of empathy and understanding. And sometimes you need to see a story written by a non-white person, or a person from a different religion, or a person of a different sexuality, to kind of understand what they're going through in their life. Even if you disagree, or even if you still are like a white supremacist or whatever, it just gives you another side. And it's funny that you mentioned the feminist thing, because there are still so many books that are, if you look at the books that are reviewed every week in your local, or in your Sydney paper or your Melbourne paper or whatever, the majority of books reviewed are predominantly by male authors. And I'm a Stella Schools ambassador, and we're all about promoting the work of women writers. And it's so important. So diversity is like gender, it's culture, it's religion, it's everything. And there can never be enough, because our society is always changing. It's very different. And even if you have two Lebanese girls who are both authors, chances are their stories are going to be very different, because, being Australian, of Lebanese background, living in different parts of Sydney, or even in the same parts of Sydney, you're going to have a different experience. And it's so important to make sure that we are really speaking to young people in the language that they know, through characters that they will understand, or through characters that they have never met before, so that we can move forward in our society and hopefully bring about a more cohesive, more understanding community.
Yeah. Moving on, what can you tell us about the yearbook committee?
So this is the yearbook committee. It is about 5 students from 5 very different groups in Year 12 who are put together, well, 4 of them are put together against their will to work on the yearbook, and 1 actually wants to be there. And it is set in the west of Sydney in a very posh private school, and most of the kids come from wealthy families, except for 1 who's a scholarship student. And it's just about their journey in Year 12, and it actually kicks off at the end of their HSC, where one of the main character's his friends is having a party, and at the during that party, someone is taken away by an ambulance. We don't know who and we don't know why. And then chapter 1 takes us back to the start of the school year where we meet those 5 characters, and it is narrated by 5 different characters. Some, reviews have said they hated that, but it was just something for me to experiment with. And I'm glad that the good reviews have said that I nailed the voices, so that's pretty good.
Yeah, I won't get into that. I mean, I liked it, but yeah, it's all a matter of personal opinion. I guess some people like to have one voice.
Yeah.
After your first novel focused on ethnic issues, it almost seems as though you've gone out of your way to avoid any such issues in your second novel. Why is that?
It's not something that I did on purpose, and I have been taken to question on that. For someone who is so vocal about diversity in young adult literature, why are your characters all white? And the reason is I am a regular visitor to schools, and I do a lot of residencies and, one-day workshops with many students at public schools, very posh schools, Catholic schools, private schools, whatever. And it's just so happens that the really, really posh private schools predominantly have white students. There are a few students who are from non-English speaking backgrounds, but on the whole, the majority of them are white. So I, again, had to write a school that was, that authentically, that was authentic, a posh private school that was authentic. And one of the girls is half Greek, and I know people are like, but, that's just something small or whatever. And I guess that's the first thing, and that, it's an accurate reflection of most posh private schools that I have been to. The second thing is that how do you define diversity? And for me, diversity doesn't just mean cultural and linguistically diverse characters. My characters come from blended families. They come from single parent families. One of them, has a mother with mental illness. Another one has a brother with Down syndrome. And there's a character who, comes from a housing commission. Our scholarship student comes from a, housing commission, lower socioeconomic status. So for me, that is my diversity in there. And the last time I was, asked this question, I really, and this is the third thing, I wanted to say that as a writer, I feel like I should be treated like any other creative, and that I should have the liberty to write what is in my heart. Just because I come from a non-English speaking background doesn't mean that I must pigeonhole myself and write only about culturally and linguistically diverse characters. I mean, that's really unfair. I've lived in my first book was about living in a square, and I've lived in a square my whole life, or my whole young life. And now that I'm an adult, or, have the freedom to go where I want and say what I want and do what I want, I should have the freedom to write outside the square that I have known my whole life. And those are probably the 3 biggest things, but I could go on and on.
Have you thought about having an ethnic character just to normalise the presence of non-white people? I mean, I get that you don't want to be stereotyped, and you don't want to be accused of always writing a Mary Sue or something like that. From my perspective, obviously, I'm a Skippy. I still want to see diversity. And I must admit, when I realised that you weren't white, I was a bit disappointed. Well, even before I realised that you weren't, a white Australian, I was a little bit disappointed that there wasn't somebody who was a bit more colourful.
Yeah. that's fair enough. And someone did say, why are the, well, I mean, look, we have Muhammad in there, who's Mommy's best friend, and he's a Palestinian Muslim. We have, you know, the Greek character, we have the Italian character, and they're smaller bit parts, but they are there. And, you know, just because they're not part of the main character, I mean, we have 5 main characters, and one of them is half Greek, and she talks about, you know, her yaya is mentioned, and, you know, it's a very brief mention, but it's there. And the reason is because in this story, the story wasn't an ethnic struggle. It wasn't, their identity didn't come from their cultural background. It didn't come from anything like that. The issues of who they are were relative to, you know, their role in the playground and their role in their individual cliques, and then their role in the yearbook committee and in each other's lives. It wasn't a story about, you know, an ethnic identity. So for me, I've already kind of filled that, you know, little bit of diversity in there with the characters that they interact with and the other characters in the playground. So I am normalizing, in my perspective, I am normalizing people of colour or people who are culturally diverse by putting them in the story. But also, this is my second book. I've done 50-50. So that's not to say I'm never going to write another ethnic character again. It's, you know, it's a double-edged sword for writers, because
especially for you, because you're not white.
Yes, because if you write characters that, and I say this for all writers, if you write characters who are white, you face criticism for not, you know, getting the diversity right. But then if you write characters who are non-white and you get something wrong, or, you know, someone of that ethnic group thinks, you know, takes offense at something or feels like you didn't quite hit the nail on the head, then you face criticism for culturally appropriating something, or, you know, misrepresenting a community. So it can be very hard. And for me, I'm all about writing things that are authentic and that I know well. So unless I really know a particular ethnic group well, chances are they're not going to be a major character in one of my stories. So I don't want to get anything wrong. I know what it feels like when people assume things about you or get things wrong about you, and sometimes it's not very nice. You know, I did a whole school talk once for 40 minutes on what inspired hate is such a strong word and the stereotypes that I faced. And then a teacher put up her hands and said, "So do you ever wear hijab?" And I said, no.
You're a Christian, not Muslim.
Yeah, and a lot of Muslims don't wear the hijab, so, you know, why would I? So I don't want to get anything wrong about anyone. And that goes not just for culturally and linguistically diverse, you know, but I don't know, for example, what it's like to come out of the closet. So I don't know if I could ever write a main character who was struggling with something like that. Sure, I could write a secondary character who is out there and whatever, because the struggle, the revelation, the story isn't there. But I can't authentically write a story because I don't know what it feels like. Whereas I do know what it feels like to feel like, you know, your parents are fashioning a, you know, a future for you that you don't really want. Or I know what it feels like if your friend stops talking to you, or if, you know, something happens in the playground that doesn't quite sit right with you, or when you see someone getting bullied and you don't know what to do about it. That stuff I can write about. But to write about, you know, an Aboriginal, like, girl growing up straddling, you know, who she really is, I don't know what it's like. And that's why when I talk about diversity, I mean, let's publish authors of diverse backgrounds. Let us share their stories. It's not my job to share someone else's story. I don't want to do that. They should have their voice. We should promote their voice.
Absolutely. I agree 100%. On the subject of diversity again, you have a character with a disability. Now, this is a minor character and it's a really, and I'm sorry, I can't remember the character's name.
Sammy.
Sammy.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah, he's a really interesting blend of independence, dependence, needing a routine. Yeah, it's a really interesting mix. So where did Sammy come from?
It was just, it wasn't something that I did on purpose. I never thought, oh my gosh, I have to include, someone with Down syndrome or autism in the story. It was just very organic. That was just their family. Every family is different. So I did have to ask a few questions of people because I'm not personally close to anyone who has Down syndrome or has a Down syndrome sibling. So I did have to ask a few questions. And there's not, I hope I didn't get anything wrong, but I might have. I'm not perfect, but I did my best. It wasn't something that I planned for. I always talk about how when there are diversity in my stories, or when there is diversity in my stories, I don't sit there with a table and see if I've ticked off token criteria. For me, it's the stories. The story is the most important, and the characters and this in relation to that story are the most important things, and then everything else just kind of comes second.
Yeah. Well, I'm no expert on Down syndrome, but I thought it was a very respectful representation of disability. Speaking as a person with a disability.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
Yeah. Now, some people have said the yearbook committee is like the Breakfast Club. What do you think of that?
I actually first saw that in a review, and I was like, "Oh wow, that's so nice," because I never even thought about it, to be honest. I didn't watch The Breakfast Club until my 20s, so I didn't know what it was about, and the book, I didn't plan for it to be the way that it was and the way that it happened. So yeah, I didn't even think about it. So that was really nice. And I like the idea of it being the Breakfast Club for the social media generation.
Yeah, yeah. Now, before all of your journalism and writing of books and stuff happened, you undertook a master's thesis on, I believe it's on moral panic about Middle Eastern communities.
Yes, so that was for my Master of Media Practice, which I did at Sydney University. And it was a dissertation, so it wasn't a big thesis. It was about 15,000 words. I basically did applied textual analysis to some newspaper articles and looked at the way that they spoke about Middle Eastern crime. And I looked at, my specific areas were religious extremism and gang crime, and I looked at the Cronulla riots a little bit and the rapes a little bit. That's something I was really passionate about at the time.
So, do you intend to continue this kind of research later?
No, not at the moment. I think there are plenty of people that, I think we've moved on from the whole Lebanese people are criminals now, and now there's this big Islamophobia issue. So it's not necessarily a Lebanese issue, but it's an Islamophobia issue, and there's a lot of, misrepresentation of Muslim Australians. Or even when there are things happening throughout the world where there's a very small minority of people trying to commit acts of terror, the whole community. So just how I felt 10 years ago or 15 years ago about how the whole Lebanese community suffered because of the actions of a few. It's the same thing now for Muslim Australians. So there's probably not that much for me to research for me in terms of the area that I was originally interested in. And there is, other authors like Randa Abdul Fattah, who's writing her thesis, her PhD thesis on Islamophobia in Australia. So I think that is a bigger issue now, but it's not something that I am very well versed in, because again, that authenticity isn't there because I don't know what it's like. I know that it's bad, and I know that people shouldn't do it, but I think I'll leave it to experts like Randa to research that. And who knows, I do like I do like academic research. I might do something else in the future, but who knows what.
Well, that sounds good. So what does the future hold for you? Are you writing any more books? Are you doing more freelancing? What's happening?
I definitely still want to freelance. I mean, I don't want to stop writing. I know that. As to what I'll be writing, I have no idea. This book has been a very different experience. To hate is such a strong word, in the sense that I don't know why. I don't know if it's because I've turned 30 this year, and you know that might come with its own kind of emotional or, you know, crossroads sort of issues. But I feel like I'm at a time in my life where I don't really know what's next. I'd love to continue writing fiction, but I feel like there's a lot of pressure in writing YA at the moment, and you know, that comes with questions like, why don't you have enough diverse characters? And I want people to see my books for what they are instead of what they are not. And sometimes it feels like people are seeing them for what they are not. And also it's a sad reflection of me, actually, because I don't have that thick skin, and I should go out and build that thick skin a little bit more so that I can continue writing for the people that do love my work. But yeah, I feel like there's a lot of pressure, and that whatever I write isn't going to come from an authentic place, but it's going to come from a need to answer the criticisms or to, you know, respond to what people feel like I should be publishing. And I don't want my writing to be that. I want it to be real, and I want it to, if it's real, it'll speak to my audience. And that's my audience is the most important thing to me, not, you know, reviewers, and not, you know, people that determine writers' festivals. I'm very, very grateful for all the opportunities that come my way. But at the end of the day, my priority is teenagers. My priority is giving them characters that they can relate to, characters who are going through the same struggles that they're going through, characters that can help them see the world differently, characters that motivate them to have a voice and to speak up about injustice of any kind. So yeah.
So you don't want to be a square peg hammered into a round hole, and you want to write authentic stories that will actually reach people.
Yep.
Yeah. One last question.
Sure.
Your bio says, and I quote, Sarah decided to pursue a career in journalism at the age of 10 after realising that, like Lois Lane and Vicky Vale, it was always the reporter that got the superhero. Which superhero did you want to catch then, and who would be your pick now?
Always and forever Superman.
Well, so you're a Lois Lane.
I'm a Lois Lane. My husband is a Batman fan, so there's a lot of tension in our house about who is better. And I will always stand by Superman. It's a love that has been with me since my childhood.
Well, that's awesome. And stay strong in the struggle.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you for talking to Dark Matter.